I'd like to call the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission
John,
is,
there's no need to call to order, you just go.
okay. The Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission is reconvening the meeting of March 24th, 2022, which was recessed at approximately 9:30 p.m. That evening. Tonight, we will be, actually from our last meeting, we rescinded our approval of COA 22-27. And tonight, we will be considering that COA and then having a motion to move forward to approve or disapprove or add whatever else we need to it. We have an update from John Zodi about this upcoming discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, commissioners and members of the public. Just want to provide an update on kind of where we are in the process right now. This was largely designed for commissioners who weren't here last week and to update you all on the council process. First, I do want to reiterate what Gloria said publicly, since we're in the meeting now, that room restrictions in City Hall are now lifted to pre-COVID standards. So we do recommend masks for those who feel that they are in need of them, who are subject to easier disease transmission and things like that. We are encouraging masks, and those are available up front if you need them. So I just want to make sure everybody in the public is clear that those restrictions are lifted. Commissioner, how are you? So to update sort of the public and commissioners, so last week there was sort of a misunderstanding about what the motion was that passed, and that was whether the COA, so that there were two sort of parts to the COA, if you'll indulge me for just a minute on the discussion there. Number one was to take the smokestack at the creamery down to 60 feet in order to make it safe. The second piece of the COA was a condition that the petitioner, the owner, Peerless, come back in 45 days and talk about designs for how we might commemorate the history of the stack and things like that. When the motion was made, I think commissioners had different understandings, and staff, quite frankly, had different understandings of what was passed. That was then clarified at the end of the meeting, and here we are. So at the council meeting last night, they had a meeting of the Committee of the Whole, which is just a committee of the council, and they recommended do pass a map that was passed, the map that was passed by the HPC on March 10th. That does include the smokestack, and it's sort of that larger map that does not hug the building. That was passed following some discussion and including an amendment by one of the council members to exclude the smokestack altogether, which was supported by Peerless. So we wanted to update you kind of where we are there and where that leads us for tonight. Even though we're reconsidering a vote, we've had a lot of voices in the community and folks who have came to the council meeting, came to the HPC, gotten some, at least one call in my office about the smokestack. There's just a lot of talk about it, and we want to make sure those voices are reflected, obviously, too, on how the staff has been approaching this. Obviously, the priorities here from talking with staff this week and today are understood by a lot of folks, and we need to just, as we present where we are, understanding that the priorities are, number one, of course, from the administration is public safety. I think we all agree that that's necessary. The second is, how do we have the most historic preservation in place at the creamery right now and moving forward? And what is going to lead us to that path? We sort of kept that in mind as staff as we've been going through this process and considering all that. So we do not support, obviously, excluding the smokestack from the map. The owner has not taken off the table pursuing legal action if a condition were passed in the COA, which we find to be disappointing and disruptive to the public safety process, potentially. So given all that, we're trying to figure out the best way to move forward with how do we make sure that the entire creamery property is preserved, that the stack is included in that we're looking out for public safety, and that understanding too that this COA isn't the only sort of bite at the creamery apple that would happen. This would be if the council moves to designate it, which according to the council recommendation from the committee, they are being recommended to do, given the action last night. So what do we need to do here? If there was intervention with the creamery property in the future, then the owner would have to come and present a COA for any work done on the property. So we have to think about that and what this condition on the COA actually means, and whether that is sort of a road that we feel like we need to go down with potential legal challenges, which were discussed this week, or if we think, as a city, as the administration and this commission, and I think members of the public have clearly stated that we want to see the creamery preserved and the smokestack preserved safely. If that's the priority, then we have to think about what weight this condition has and what extent the owner is willing to go to take this to court. And so I think that we've got to really consider that and what our goals are at the end of the day. And I'm sorry to feel like I'm going on here a little bit, but we did have we've been discussing this as staff quite a bit and making sure that we are doing the very best we can to present you the best information, the most updated information, and what has been a lengthy process already. But just to make sure that we are doing what's best here for the mission of this commission, first of all, with all of you in the room, talking about historic preservation, but also what's best for the public here in Bloomington. So whether that condition turns into a recommendation, which I'll defer to Danielle, on whether that relieves some legal question here, and we say, our recommendation is that we do something to commemorate the stack, and we engage with Peerless and work with them on that, or not, that's up to you. But that is the best and most updated information from the staff, and I'll leave it there unless either of my colleagues have anything to say.
So we'll open this up for discussion. And is Peerless with us by any chance? Is Mr. Cordero here?
Yes, they are.
All right.
Can the representatives from Peerless raise their hands? Excellent.
Okay, do they have any additional comments they want to make to us right now?
I'm asking them to unmute in case they want to comment.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Michael Cordero here. Hi, everybody. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, sorry. We're here basically, sort of same position that we were last week. We want to bring this to a safe height. We do not believe that additional conditions are within the mandate of the HPC. We are willing to work with the HPC, the city, to allow, whether it's installations or commemorative pieces or whatever it is, we're happy to work with the city to allow that to be, put somewhere on our property. We do not feel that it's our obligation to pay for said items, and that it's within the purview to mandate that, basically. So again, we're happy to work with everybody. We understand the importance and significance of it. We want to see it commemorated. We just do not believe that it is our obligation to pay for that commemoration.
Thank you, Mr. Cordero. Okay, questions? Discussion? At this point, let's start with Matthew.
I have a question. Do we have a motion on the table still?
The motion was rescinded at the last meeting, so right now we don't have a motion on the table.
I'll put one on the table.
Can we
All right.
discuss?
So I move that we approve COA 22-27 without condition.
Can we have a discussion first? A
Well,
little
there's
bit?
time for discussion.
Okay, there's still time for, but it would be, okay, never mind.
So I made the motion, it's time for discussion, if somebody seconds it.
Great. Did you have a second?
I will second that.
All right, now we have discussion.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, Marlene.
Okay, so we have the 60-foot tower. We have this 60-foot tower, potentially. And so if they wanted to put something on the top of this tower, they couldn't. Unless they went for variance, right? Because it's way higher than any sign would be allowed to be put, and it's also would have to be larger than any sign would be allowed in the city, right? So basically, that would be it, right? Is that true? I'm asking.
The engineering report said that anything placed on top of a 60-foot structure would basically, jeopardize that integrity and that code compliance. So we were told that nothing should be placed on top of that 60-foot height structure.
Like not even lights. I'm talking about lights or a sign. That's
That
all.
would be, I think, more of a question for the planning department as to what's permissible with
Well,
either
the-
signing or lighting.
Marlene?
Okay, there's no answer then.
All right. Elizabeth?
John, can you show me, where would it look like? Where's 60 feet? Can you point out about where that would be?
Yeah, so it's, I usually reference the Johnson's lettering, which isn't, the Johnson's lettering begins, I think, and those others on the meeting, please step in here if I'm wrong, but the Johnson's lettering begins, I believe, around 80 feet. So if you're looking at it,
Sorry.
if anybody's got a, sorry, do we have, oh, okay. So this is
70.
70? Yeah, so you're right here, Elizabeth. And so the Johnson's lettering begins.
So
it
we're
stops
talking about
right
taking
there.
about half of it off.
Yeah, it's 140 feet now, so it'd be a little more than half.
Okay. I couldn't visualize what 60 feet. Okay.
Bernard?
Forgive me, I think I brought this up last week, and in thinking about it with everything that's going on, I still just need a bit of clarity and certainty as to the difference between the 60 feet and the 75 feet. I know, I fully accept that preserving it at 140 feet is impossible, right? You'd have to knock it down and build something else that's safe and functional, and we don't need the smokestack for functional reasons, so that doesn't make sense. But there was an issue between 75 feet and 60 feet, and my understanding of why we're not doing 75 feet is because of cost. Is that correct?
Laura, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to speak, but, Michael Cordaro wants to speak. I believe the owner should respond.
So cost is one factor in that. Second factor is that while the engineer believes that it could possibly be engineered to go back up to 75 feet, there are significant risks and unknowns with that plan, which could cause, a full destruction of the tower. It would take some, serious underpinning of the foundation, which also could disrupt the box culvert, which is a city storm sewer that's very nearby. It could jeopardize the foundation of the actual office building because it's so close to the office building. So there's a number of reasons why that is off the table, really.
Right, and
The order it has stated 60 feet.
right. I'm still trying to understand why it is that after 2 studies and over what period of time we're talking about.
Well, the initial assessment by the city was done in 2017, and then the most that was updated in 2022.
So we're talking 5 years.
and
Why are still
Peerless is done.
Why are we still speaking about what could happen? I mean, why is there still doubt as to whether 75 feet is possible or not? I have a difficulty in trying to, in getting to a reason why after 5 years and 2 studies by world-class engineers, we're still speaking about if we did this, this could happen and that could happen, and why don't we know whether it will happen if we do this thing or whether it won't, to some scientific certainty,
Yeah,
to some degree of certainty.
well, we know that 60 feet puts it in line with building code, that 75 feet would be more structural work that would need to be done, which is the increased cost and the unknowns, just, I think the higher you get. 140 feet, we know that it is not at all in line with building code and is subject to the scientific analysis, which says that sort of an F2, 120-mile-hour wind or a seismic event could cause it to fail. I mean, it's always could until it happens, I would say, because you just don't know for sure. It's kind of what I mentioned last week. You're always assessing that balance that you need to strike with, making sure it's safe and doing your best to make that happen. Gloria, if you have something else.
I can provide just a little bit more of the technical detailing, although, again, we can ask Michael Cordaro or Joseph Patrick to give even more detail. But there's a lot of structural issues with the smokestack. It is thicker on the bottom than at the top. At the top, it is only 1 brick thick, and these bricks aren't made anymore. The leaning shape that it has right now doesn't have, the engineers could not find precedent of how that could be worked with. The 60 feet is the basis for removal. For 75 feet, they would still need to take it down to 65 feet and then shore up, go underground, shore up the base. So the lean actually starts at 30 feet. It doesn't start at 60. They have to go underground, figure out what's happening. There's still a lot of unknowns with the bedrock. What has happened, what sort of damage the bedrock may have received over the years from the impact of the structure. Remember, the structure weighs quite a few tons, and even though the bedrock is very strong, there are certain unknowns about what's happening down there. So they actually would have to go down, shore that up, and then rebuild and put a lot of structural work just to get to 75 feet. So 75 feet actually involves a lot of rebuilding on a structure that is already leaning. So there's a lot of, the engineers have done a lot of math, but there's a lot of additional factors that are simply unknown because of the deterioration of the current brick and a lot of other material.
You see, so I'm not going to belabor the point much beyond this, but what I'm hearing now is 75 feet won't work because it's hard, not because it's impossible. I have seen where people have gone to great lengths and used a lot of creativity to figure out how to preserve historical structures, as much of it as can possibly be preserved. I've sat through quite a few of these meetings where the response to a position of it's expensive and it's hard has not been very accommodating, to the point where I've heard people say, well, you're quite free to sell it to somebody who can afford to fix it. And I don't think I've heard any reason why we can't go to 75 feet that is impossible. I hear it's difficult. I hear we'd have to be creative. I hear about soil and they don't know what's there, but I'm almost sure there's a science for that. You can core, you can take samples, you can take it to a lab and figure that out. So, I'm willing to accept 60 feet, but if that's the consensus, but I still don't accept that 75 feet is an impossibility beyond it being expensive and hard.
So, sorry, Sam, Chris Durbam also has had his hand risen for quite a while.
Okay.
let's do Sam and then we'll do Chris. Sam?
I'll just briefly address part of what my fellow commissioner just said. I think by trying to hit 75 feet, you open up a big can of worms. You open up a lot of risk on the existing structure, because when you do that kind of excavation, it's not like, by looking at something, you change it. So by digging down, there's the potential to disturb the foundation and knock the whole thing down. So, which you don't get with the same process. You have a very different process for the 60 feet. So in part, it's not only the safety of the public, but the safety of the original structure is at stake if you go up to 75 feet. And I hope that helps paint out what the difference between those two issues are.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Chris?
Yes, I agree with the petitioner that we should do this without conditions. I think we need to send a very clear message to the council. The council supported our boundaries unanimously last night, but there were 3 council members missing, and there were 2 members who voted to remove the smokestack. So this is much closer politically than we realize. And if we can be very clear about, okay, 60 feet, okay, no conditions, okay, we trust the petitioner to work with the city. We could even do some kind of commemoration on our budget, a sign, something like that. But if we come out to the council with an unclear resolution here, we could lose the boundaries, and we could possibly lose the smokestack. So that's my perspective, and I think that is the political reality. I've talked to a council member who affirmed that very reality for us. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Duncan?
Yeah, in response to Renard, I think that my reading of the engineer's report was pretty much the way Gloria clarified it, with the possible addition that there would have to be structural improvement, meaning probably some kind of steel armature construct on the interior, which opens up several construction issues about how you do that. And I think the feeling of the engineers was that, yes, with certain improvements to the foundation and the addition of a structural armature, you could stabilize it at 75 feet. But they didn't seem willing to say it wasn't their recommendation that be the route taken. And so at that point, I guess for me, we're already losing, well, we've already lost 30 feet of it. We're going to lose another 60. And I guess the difference between 60 and 75 aesthetically doesn't matter that much to me, considering that 60 we've been pretty much assured by the engineering will be stable without foundation improvements or changes, without the so-called disruption that Sam refers to. And nobody knows what any of those things would really do until they're done, and then you do another study to see if that's adequate. So I think that given that unknown, regardless of the cost issue, and I sympathize with what you're saying about that. It seems to me that 60 feet is a good solution. And in terms of what Chris is saying, I was at the meeting last night. I watched the council work, and he's right that they seem to be to zero in on the fact that the issue for us primarily was boundary, and they were in really full support, 6-0 support of the original designation proposal, which included half of the lot, which protects not only the stack, but also protects a margin of space between the back of the building and where their building's going to be. Peerless's objection to that is that their current plans for the building, remember that building's not there, their current plans for the building show that district boundary in the building, which I can see would be a concern for them. However, all it really means is that they have to come to us for C of A for the work that they do there, which I think seems completely reasonable, that they have to do that. So personally, right now, this second, before anybody else speaks, I support the 60 feet. And I also support what Chris is saying about taking the condition off that Gloria suggested. Because frankly, all we're really asking them to do is propose some kind of commemoration or acknowledgement. It's almost as if we do this, you have to do this, where in fact, I would rather have this group of people making a decision about how to commemorate the creamery and the smokestack. I'm not particularly interested in hearing a proposal from the owner. I'm more interested in seeing what the city of Bloomington is willing to do to commemorate the building further, if that's the decision that we want to do. I mean, it does have a National Register plaque on the front of it, so it's not like, it's not hiding from significance. So that said, I think I would support the proposal as it was made.
Elizabeth?
I pretty much just have some questions. Maybe John can answer this. It is historic. It seems to me, I'm hearing from you, that the community wants that stack there. They love that stack. Am I getting, the community in the whole?
The people we've heard from, I'd say by and large, the public meetings have supported seeing the stack included, and yes.
Okay,
So to
so
answer your
with that
question
being
succinctly.
said then, if there was a public interest in it, and these people don't want to spend money for a commemorative, wouldn't the community of Bloomington be willing to do that because they love the smokestack? And the next question is, surely to God, this isn't the only smokestack like this in America. Somebody else has had to deal with this same issue somewhere. And America's really small when you think about it. We all can communicate some kind of way. Has anybody reached out to anybody else and see what they've done? Another thing, we've got some intelligent people here, far smarter in this community, that probably says, hey, this is what you can do with that smokestack. This is what we need to do. So, I understand the owner saying, well, we shouldn't spend the money on it. But I think if the community loves it enough, that won't be a problem, getting the money. I think we'll pay for that. But it's just how we're going to commemorate this, and we've got some people here in Bloomington that probably got the answer to that. I don't think we do sitting here, but it's out. There's an answer somewhere.
Duncan, do you have any experience with smokestacks in other communities and what has taken place?
I don't have any experience with ones that are explicitly National Register or locally designated. But I know in most cases, the preferred solution is complete removal. And when they're being used in an industrial, when the industrial use intends to be continued and the stacks outlive their usefulness, they're almost all rebuilt out of steel. Nobody's building masonry smokestacks anymore. And I won't say nowhere, but typically that's not a solution because they don't last as long and they're not as structurally stable. And most smokestacks in the industrial world now are way higher than this. I mean, you've all driven to Indianapolis and seen the stacks. I mean, they're 4 times as high. And I know that they have a life. The first one that was at the creamery burned out and was removed, and this one was built. That's because of the burning of coal in an acid-sensitive masonry structure. That's just what happens. You can't. I live in an 1830s house. People burn coal in the first furnace there, and the brick in the basement is all dusting out and has continued to do so even though we've tried to neutralize the sulfur dioxide that was absorbed by the brick. So I guess there's a life expectancy for that brick, and that's what happens with these stacks. So, and I also just want to add that I've worked with RC engineers, and I've said this a couple of times before. These guys are the experts. That report if they put their signature on that report, it's good stuff. Their study is good, it's sound, they're not speculating, you know, and so that convinced me right away that first of all, there's a real danger that this thing could collapse. I'm much more worried, as I said, about it collapsing on the building because of the damage that would wreak, but.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Very
more or
good.
less.
But you know, if you threw enough money at it, could you rebuild it? Not without tearing it down and rebuilding something different. You can't rebuild that one because there's just not enough integrity left in it.
Do we have any public? Yes.
Okay. My name is Karen Duffy, and I have a statement from my neighborhood association making a number of points, some of which may be helpful or not. So thanks for your patience in listening to us. Dear Commissioners, the Near West Side Neighborhood Association Board of Directors offers the following thoughts on COA 2227 in the form that it was written up by hand with the requirement for your approval. So, there's a series of bullet points here. We fully agree that the Johnson's Creamery smokestack should be reduced to 60 feet and that a commemorative should be created to stand beside it. We feel strongly that the most appropriate form for that commemorative would be an interpretive display rather than an art installation. We envision perhaps a standing panel whose design and production could match the marvelous series of informational panels that stand along the Beeline Trail, continuing through the new stretch at the switchyard. Such a panel already exists for the creamery near its office. The one we envision would be added for the smokestack placed at its immediate location. We suggest that the content for such a panel be composed to address no more than, say, 3 basic areas, such as 1, the original function of the smokestack as the source of power for creamery operations, which some people don't know about. 2, and this could be a shorter transitional section, the stack is a long-standing visual landmark in the community from its earlier advertising purpose to its more recent symbolic one. And 3, why the smokestack had to be reduced. That final section, emphasizing the primacy of public safety, could explain the stack's deterioration due to pollutants and the weaknesses of its brick construction at a height above 60 feet. As in the other Beeline panels, 4 or 5 photographs and diagrams could effectively supplement text that appears to us to be around, I don't know, 750 to 1,000 words. That's just a wild guess on those panels. I don't know. They're fairly lengthy, but really well done. Okay, as to cost. We believe that the cost for a panel of this type would not be exorbitant, nor prove to be a burden on Peerless or the city, whoever pays. It doesn't seem it would be a burden to us without knowing that figure. But in fact, we propose that in picking up the tab, Peerless or whoever would likely stand to gain positive publicity and generate goodwill for their building project in our community. We point out that despite the best efforts of everyone in this room and Peerless themselves and everybody well beyond this room, from the mayor to the press, there are likely many residents in Bloomington who have not kept up with this issue and who will be alarmed to learn that the smokestack will be reduced rather than repaired or rebuilt. So to say goodwill is needed here, and good effort. Okay, last but not least, we express our desire that the appropriate city agencies and the HPC be involved in or even fully responsible for developing the content for such a panel. With no disrespect to Peerless, we don't think they should be saddled with that task. It's not their bailiwick. Instead, we point out that the city possesses tremendous resources in this regard. No one alive knows more about the Johnson Creamery than Duncan Campbell. And in preparing the nomination, Gloria Colombrana has demonstrated admirable research and compositional skill. Not to volunteer, you guys, but we suggest that they oversee current content development with final approval given to the HPC. Thank you for the opportunity to express those views. And that's from the Near West Side Neighborhood Board of Directors, being Peter Dorfman, President, Alan Balcoma, Vice President, William Baus, Treasurer, Tom Payne, Secretary, and Olivia Dorfman, Karen Duffy, and Natalia Galvin, Representatives at Large.
Thank you very much. So we have a question on the table. I mean, not a question, but a motion. Matthew, would you restate your motion?
I'm sorry, we had questions.
Yes.
I know it kind of got mixed in with comments, but
Okay.
if I may, I'd like
Absolutely.
to make a comment. My issue, my primary issue, even though, you know, we kind of got a bit distracted with 60 versus 75, I think with that I wanted, for the most part, just clarity as to why we're doing either. And I'm fully satisfied that 60 is what's going to happen and what should happen. My primary concern is one about, it's more of a public policy issue. On one side, you have city government and this committee that is of the position, I think supported by legal, that says we have the right to put a condition on it. And on the other hand, we have somebody saying, no, we don't have the right to put something on it. I'm less concerned about the form that condition takes. I mean, when it comes out in the wash, like you said, it could be a really inexpensive display that is decided on. And I don't think whatever would have come out of this stipulation that a display be provided would be anything in the region, you know, that would be a financial burden on a developer that I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe into millions of dollars to do this development. I strongly believe that this is an issue of policy. If it is that the city believes that it has the right to attach a condition to the COA, I don't think that we should not defend that right because of the politics of it. I think it's going to come back and bite us in the behind at some point, when it is that the issue is probably more serious and the stakes are probably a little higher. I don't think we should make a decision that kicks the can down the road as to whether we as a body have the right to attach a condition to a COA. What this condition will amount to in the end is moot, it's up for discussion, and I don't think it would be a burden on the city if the city does it, and I don't think it would be a burden on the developer. But I think this is an issue that should be resolved here.
Yes.
Sorry, because I have
Yes.
I have two hands raised. We've
Okay.
had public comments. Janice Sorby is online.
All right.
And Chris Durban also raised his hand.
Okay. Let's do Jan Sorby. Jan?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to chime in and say that I went out and I was reading some today, looking at smokestacks, because we cannot be the only community that's wrestled with these ideas before. And Charleston actually is in the midst of doing something very similar right now with 2 smokestacks. And the kind of resolution that they've come to is they have 235 foot smokestacks that are, in the realm of falling. I guess the inner lining is really problematic with these 2 stacks. And it's going to cost $3 million to stabilize and preserve these stacks. Their city is willing to toss in half of that, and it looks like they're going to try and go ahead and save these smokestacks. Now, bringing it back home to our position here is, if we are comfortable with the 60-foot stack, I have to agree that I don't want to see the city go through yet another lawsuit. And perhaps that money could be much better used by the city, rather than to give it to lawyers to fight something, to have something commemorative. And other things that I've read with other communities wrestling with this is that they have placards talking about, the small fingerprints that were in the bricks that were being made, which indicated that children had been making these bricks, and started talking about, exactly what is involved in the cultural and the cultural background of making these bricks and having the smokestack. And ironically, in Charleston, it's also one of them was a creamery, one of them was a city incinerator. But I just think that we don't want yet more lawsuits. The city has had a lot of those already, and I see that as kind of a waste of money. I love the smokestack. I think it's a wayfaring sign. Just a side story, young woman that lives on the west side, came back home from a short trip. And before this even started, before the discussion on the smokestack started, she said to me at dinner, she said, I got back from my trip and I saw the smokestack and I knew I was home. So that said, I would love to see some semblance of something to indicate what was, what is. But we don't need more lawsuits. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thanks, Jan. Chris?
Yes, the cost of maintenance after the lowering to 60 feet came up at council. And I'd like to hear the petitioner and Duncan talk about the cost of maintenance once the chimney is lowered to 60 feet, pointed, taken care of. What is the ongoing anticipation of expense? And I think Duncan probably has enough experience to be able to make some kind of estimate, and I think the petitioner had some ideas too. Thank you.
Well, because the petitioner will own it, it'll still be their responsibility to maintain it after it's reduced in size. What that looks like right now is replacement of spalled bricks, and the hope was to use some good salvage bricks in that effort. And it doesn't seem like from the report there would have to be any foundation adjustment if it's at 60 feet. And then, like all brick masonry structures, there's routine tuck pointing that's necessary. That would be true for the building, the creamery building as well. Most tuck pointing appropriately done tuck pointing can have a 60 to 100-year life. So it's not something that you have to do every minute. But the thing that happens is you tend to only repair what needs repair on that moment. So the next year, there will probably be some more that needs repair. The next year, there might be some more that needs repair. But there would be piecemeal maintenance over time to do that. If you, let's say, take out the bad mortar and replace all of it, all of the mortar with new mortar in one action, then that mortar can be expected to last 60 to 100 years in a typical situation. So that would be an option for the owner. It could repoint the entire thing, or it could do it incrementally, and that's the way most people do preservation, is incrementally, because if you have good material there, the mandate is that you not replace it until such time as it's not doing its job anymore. So typically it would be done over time. Chris, if you're asking me to put a cost on that, the last time I retuck pointed a building, which was about 20 years ago, it cost roughly $8 a square foot. And I'd say you could at least double that probably by today's standard. And I don't, if they can salvage the brick, then they'll just have the cost of salvage. So.
But there will be pointing done in the repair process, I expect.
That's there hasn't really been a discussion about what the maintenance aspects of it would be, other than peerless recognition, I think, in one of his statements about the fact that they understood that would be an obligation of the owner.
And it doesn't seem to me to be a huge burden. It's the city's doing it with the showers factory. His building has repair that'll be ongoing maintenance. I'm just not seeing it as a giant obligation of the future that's going to weigh heavily on the cost of the project.
Okay, Chris. Anybody else has their hand up? Marlene?
Okay, so I just, to your point, I just had a couple of questions. One, well, they're comments, actually. When I was living in Massachusetts, I was on a series of commissions, and the one thing that Jan said that's really frightening to me is that you're afraid of a lawsuit, because then you do end up doing things that you don't want to do. I mean, there was one development project in this community where there was the second deposit of diatomaceous earth. Now, when I was working for Moshe Softy, we were, this is not a long story, but it's an interesting story. So he came into the office one day, and everybody was in an absolute flourish. I mean, everybody was crazy. And what had happened was they had gotten an engineer from the East Coast to do a project out in the West Coast, and that was the other deposit of diatomaceous earth. And once they started digging into it, the whole thing turned into liquid, because that's what happens to diatomaceous earth. It just flows. So in this little tiny town, that happened to be the second deposit of diatomaceous earth that exists, apparently, in large quantities. And this guy who owned the property, not only did he have an engineer who misrepresented the property lines on a survey, but he wanted to dig through this thing, right? And he was doing all sorts of stuff that he wasn't allowed to do. He was mismatching fill and anyways, the city couldn't afford to carry on with this, and so it just went through, and it was a complete disaster. But and the other question is, aren't there COAs that we've had sort of with conditions? I mean, people have to come back and show us the paint colors. People have to come back and show us the the materials. And I think we did that last time. Isn't that what? And then the third. I agree that we are at a point where it is a position, and it becomes it's a threat. This is a threat. And, everybody's saying, well, this would be a small project. We're talking about not anything great. We're talking about a panel. Whether who pays for it or who doesn't pay for it, or whether we have to come back and have an argument about whether it's allowed to be on their site or not, is, it seems like it's a small thing. If we all agree, okay, it's going to be a panel. I think there's a problem with the logic. of not putting a condition on because there's a threat of a lawsuit. I mean, if we freely decide and we honestly decide that, okay, we don't need any condition, but it just seems like such a heavy hammer from the petitioner that's got everybody scared.
Sam?
I'll address Commissioner Newman's concerns, at least some of them, I hope, rather quickly. In that, I don't feel this is the time to address whether or not the HPC can have add-ons. I think this is the time to get the smokestack to a point where it is safe. And I'm not finished, please. I'm not finished, please.
But I'm not arguing with that, Sam. I'm really not arguing with that.
What I'm trying to say, it sounds like you are.
No.
What I'm trying to say is that, as Mr. Zodi said earlier, this is not the last bite of this apple. I think the appropriate time to address that is when the developer comes back to make a proposal to improve the property. I don't believe that this is the time where we slow down the process and further endanger the public. I think these are separate, these can be addressed as separate issues, and I think that it is more expedient and more safe to divvy it up. And that is why I seconded the motion made by Commissioner Sullivan.
Yes.
We have Chris Durham online, Joseph Patrick and Michael Cordero. The three of them have their hands raised. You
Okay.
decide who gets to speak in.
All right, well, let's call on Mr. Cordero and let him speak. Michael?
Hello.
Yes.
Am I allowed to share my screen?
I can make you a co-host.
Okay.
I think you made Joe the co-host.
Oh, sorry. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Okay, let me see if I can show. Okay. Let's see, hopefully this. Oh, geez.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
while we're sitting here, checking in, Allison Chopard here, sorry, I'm going through some medical issues. But if we could have comments addressed to the chair, that would be you, instead of other members, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
All right, so, we're talking about whether or not, the process, I guess, and it gets down to details and whether or not a condition can be placed. If you would all just take a second to read, and this is Bloomington Municipal Code 808020 on certificates of appropriateness. If you would please read.
Mr. Cordero, we were all given this earlier, and we have reviewed it, and we understand your position that you should not be responsible to commemorate at your expense the smokestack. We understand that.
Yeah, I would say we all understand.
Yes, we understand
We don't
that.
need to be-
So going into this discussion at this point is not where we want to go. We also have the legal opinion from city from Daniel Dixon, the city attorney.
Okay. well,
So
then,
we don't want to
cut this
discuss this at this
But,
point.
okay. Sure,
All right, thank you.
understood, just don't want to talk about it.
Correct. We're all aware of it. Do you have anything else you'd like to add? Okay. Chris, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that it really is a jump ball at council, and I'll restate that it's important that we have a clear, sensible response that is not open-ended, that is simply as proposed, and I suggest that we definitely support the petition on the motion on the floor. I think it will make us have a much better chance of having the boundaries that Duncan and the commission wish. And that is, I think that's exactly where council is, so we better be aware of that. Thank you.
Do we have anybody else?
Bernard? And just for clarity, I read your opinion, and what I got from the opinion is that there is no danger of the remedial work that needs to be done on the smokestack being delayed because of anything that we would decide on here, because the timeline will still be adhered to. And if it is that the petitioner decides to go another route, then the city can do the work, and there are mechanisms to get it paid for should his position not be supported in the court. I recall you saying a lien can be put on it and other remedies, but
I'll clarify that.
Sure.
That discussion was more in the context of of the second part of a statute or the ordinance that talks about emergency public safety demolitions, where there is an apparent and immediate threat to the life of persons or to property. And so there is a separate process where you are faced with an immediate danger that can't be appropriately addressed by any other measures. So we can't make repairs, we can't do anything else. And so that was part of a different argument where if the city ultimately had to take an immediate action that the owner wasn't able to do or refused to do, then we would have to place a lien on the property to recover those funds. That's not the situation we're in right now. The point of that argument was to say that we are not governed by that section of the ordinance, that we're governed by the section of the ordinance requiring an application for a certificate of appropriateness.
right, I think we're saying the same thing. It's like, right now, we're not in any danger, so the process can
I wouldn't say we're
take.
not,
I
I
guess
wouldn't
what I
say
would
we're not in any danger. I mean, there's definitely a possibility of that smokestack falling. It might take an act of God, or it just could be one day it does tumble. I think it's imperative that we move forward in some way.
Right, that wasn't the point I was making.
Okay.
I was, let me choose my words carefully now. Unless something extraordinary happens, we are not in any danger of the smokestack collapsing within the time frame set out for the remedial work to be done. Would that be a fair comment to make?
No, I'm not comfortable agreeing with
Okay,
that,
then I'm
Commissioner. I'm
Taking out to water as to where we are now
Well-
in terms of safety, because I'm hearing that there is no clear and immediate danger. And then on the other hand, I'm hearing, yeah, but we kind of are.
Well, if I can clarify, I don't want to ever be the source of confusion, but I don't want to be a contrarian either. I think we're trying to balance always, the issue of public safety, and I think I would agree with what John said, is that you never know, and we don't have the luxury of waiting, I think, and there's nothing in the engineering report that says, unless you start repair work on this it's going to collapse, but it has this much longer before it will collapse. That information is not there because we just don't know. We do know some scientific factors that would lead to the potential failure of it. And as the, sort of primary stewards of public safety here, I think we have to strike that balance with what we're doing now. I think this process and my comments tonight are designed to encourage this to move expeditiously in the right way to make sure, again, that we balance looking out for public safety, number one, and making sure we have as much historic preservation in place at the creamery as possible, whatever the other, sort of talking about public policy, those are the policy issues that we're dealing with and trying to strike that balance, and felt like we need to restate those priorities so that we're all on the same page with why we're going this about the way we are.
Okay, so I would like this to be my last question. Is there a result of this vote on the COA that would result in any delay in fixing the smokestack? Whether we vote for or against it, would any of those outcomes delay what needs to happen?
I will say potentially voting to add a condition, if it resulted in some form of litigation, either through an injunction or an effort to invalidate the COA, could result in a delay in the stack being reduced to 60 feet.
Right, and this is where I get to your opinion. Let's just say we vote to keep the condition and there is a delay. Why couldn't the condition that you spoke of, in your opinion, be triggered and we use the emergency powers just to have it removed? And I think that is the issue that I'm wrestling with. If this thing ends up in a lawsuit, why don't we just use the emergency powers that you have, move the smokestack, and the end result would be the same. We would have the smokestack reduced in a time period that limits, mitigates, eliminates the danger to the public, and the process, should this commission so decide to vote for a condition, that could continue. I'm trying to figure out whether there's a mutual exclusivity to these two things happening.
There is. If we operate under that second portion of the ordinance for the immediate danger that can't be otherwise mitigated, then that process essentially would obviate the effectiveness of any order for a condition, because what we would be saying is there is not time for a COA. The only thing we can do right now to protect people and safety is to cut that thing down without any other. We would basically be undoing what you would be voting to do at that point.
And this is definitely my last question. And it comes from something that Sam said, and Sam, I trust you implicitly. But I still want the attorney to give me the opinion on your assertion as to whether we would get another bite at this apple. You said that we would be given the opportunity to revisit this.
Not the smokestack,
The
but the building itself, and what would be constructed on the lot, then yes.
Well,
But am I wrong on that, Daniel?
Well, I think maybe more to your question, and maybe what Sam was saying as well, playing into the idea of the goal of preserving as much of this map as possible with the council side, that there is still an opportunity for this commission, whenever the owner wants to make any sort of material alteration to the creamery building, if it's designated by the council, that would immediately require it to come back to this commission for a certificate of appropriateness.
I would stick a condition on it then.
Where this commission could evaluate the proposal and whatever it is that the owner is planning to do with the property, and can decide to approve or deny any of those certificates of appropriateness based on whether or not this commission feels that it appropriately respects the historical character and history and legacy of this property. And so what that essentially means is you will, what Sam was saying about getting another bite at the apple is, if it's designated, yes, everything that the owner does that's a material alteration to this building going forward would be coming back to you for a COA, and you will be seeing them again, and you will talk to them again.
Okay, I'm gonna adhere to my promise where I'm not gonna ask another question. But if you'll allow me, I'll make a comment. And I'm gonna shut up afterwards. Public safety is something that I won't compromise on. And I get the feeling that from what you're saying, we need to err on the side of caution. I'm also taking your advice to say that we will revisit this again. But I feel duty bound to say this as someone who has worked in public policy almost all his life. I agree that we should not be afraid of lawsuits. I do not trust, and I'm not making a personal comment against the petitioner, I just don't trust capitalists in general to put the interests of anything other than profit first. I do not. And this idea of taking the developer at his word that at some point in the future he will revisit this, no. I also believe that if you have a right, and I think we believe that we have a right to attach a condition, if we don't defend these rights, we will lose them. I believe that if we allow this to appear that we're voting one way or another because we don't want the hassle or the cost of fighting for this right in court, we would be setting a very dangerous precedent where we will never be able to attach a condition ever again, because we'll always be on the losing end of big money from wherever that money comes from. That's it. I'm gonna be quiet now.
All right, thank you, Bernard. Yes, Merlin.
Okay, so you're saying that we get to look at these things again, but because a little bit of this new building is going to be in the protected site, does that mean we have some sort of design review?
That's right.
I want someone to answer that, because I've had comments from some other commissioners.
If the building falls within the boundary of the local historic district, if the new building falls within that boundary, then you will have design review over that portion of that new building.
Right.
As a C of A. You will have to approve a C of A for that portion of that building. They can't build it without your approval. If the boundary is reduced so that the proposed new building is not inside it, then you won't.
But we would have review over the creamery if they make changes to anything of the exterior.
Anything within the boundary.
So whatever they end up doing with that building, change it anywhere on the outsides, then it comes in our review again.
Well, I mean, I did a project, and I know the answers to these things, but I just want to hear somebody else say it, so, 555 more.
Any more? Anybody else?
Chris Durbon, that's his hand.
Chris?
Was he not commented already?
He has another comment, Allison.
Maybe, maybe not. Nope.
No. Allison, you weren't here at the start, but you're here now. Do you have any comments or questions at this point?
It's comment period, correct? I won't ask any questions during comment period as a rule of order. I think that this is a difficult, very difficult decision. I don't have much reason to believe that if they were to come back with a condition of approval for, say, changing windows or bumping out the building a bit, that we can say, yeah, sure, you can do that, but you also have to put up a smokestack. I mean, they're so unrelated. If I were them, I would bring a lawsuit saying that that condition has nothing to do with the COA that they're bringing forward. I mean, otherwise you could do that to everyone. You could say, yeah, sure, you can change out your doorways, but you also have to fund this $500,000 statute glorifying the city of Indiana. I think that that's a fair comparison. So I don't really believe that we could or would legally do that. Obviously, I did not get to ask questions of Mr. Dixon, but if I was a property owner, I surely would be infuriated with a request like that when I'm simply trying to make a small change to a historic building to then add something. It smells of bribery or something. It just does, it smells to me. But the point is today that the smokestack needs to come down. And so I do think that I'll be voting in favor of this motion. And I'm a little concerned because I wish there was a way to get this question in front of council. They represent specific areas and all of the constituents. We don't. And if the city finds out tomorrow morning that the smokestack is gone and we don't know how long or what it's going to look like or anything like that, I think there's going to be an outrage. I really do. I'm a moderate, I suppose, when it comes to historic preservation. But my opinion was, let's find a way to keep the smokestack as tall as it was. You know, someone mentioned like a light up art feature, and I thought, no, I would rather just not have the smokestack than some commemoration pole artwork. I mean, I just have it or not, right? And so I would rather not have a smokestack and not have. I would rather not have a smokestack and no artwork or replacement instead of that option. So it's unfortunate this isn't going to go to the council and get more publicity because I don't think that the public understands that this decision, this heavy decision that we're making to change the skyscape of our town, or city rather, I just don't think that they understand that that's going to happen, and it's going to be a pretty final decision if I'm right about the further certificates of approval. I took a long time. Hopefully Steve Olin will notice because I try to go quickly, but I do think it was all important to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. So I think we're at the point where we have a motion on the table. We have a second. Matthew, would you restate that motion?
Yeah, I move that we approve COA 22-27 with no conditions.
Thank you. Dee, are you with us?
Yeah,
Okay.
ready?
Yep.
Do we need a second again?
Nope. But Sam will do it
I'll
again.
second again.
Yeah,
Okay,
just to make sure.
Marlene Newman? I didn't hear Marlene.
I didn't answer.
She's thinking,
Okay,
Okay, sorry.
go to the next person.
she passed for right now, but if you could come back to her, please.
Okay, Doug Bruce?
Doug's not with us?
Yes.
Oh, Doug is.
Miss Dollar? Miss Dollar?
Yes.
Matthew Seddon?
Yes.
John Saunders?
Yes.
Elizabeth Mitchell?
Yes.
Allison Chopra?
Well, I'm in a wonderful position to abstain. Thank you.
Bernard Cross?
Very reluctant, yes.
And then Marlene Newman?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Motion carried.
All right. Thank you. Is there anything else we need to talk about this evening?
Just, I'm sorry, David, if you had something official. I'm just going to thank the commission for their deliberation on this. Heavy discussion certainly with an iconic structure. And so next step is we'll be at the council next week for their final consideration on the historic designation and the map. So appreciate everyone's deliberation on this. It's been not an easy issue.
Anybody else? Okay, let's adjourn this session.